from the wood itself. The hammer of the axe is made from the wood itself. Right? They undid their own. Anyway. Exactly.
What did you say?
All right, so let's learn. Okay, so I figure we have a couple Wednesdays until Purim, right? So I figure we'll go through one aspect of the site of Purim. Purim is mamash. Every piece of Torah is a site. I mean, then you have Purim, which is a site of sites. So like this, what we're going to learn tonight is basically a breakdown of a particular piece from Rav Tzaddik in Sefer Tzidkas HaTzaddik. So instead of just going through the piece straight, it comes from all over the place, different Marmukaimis and so on. So I figured we'll sort of deconstruct it and work it through with some additions of other inyanim and so on. But we'll see where it leads us tonight, and then Bez Hashem, maybe next week we'll go deeper into this particular sugya. We'll be mocked in like this. Thank you very much. So it's start like this, every yontif, it's a big cloud to know. Every yontif that we have, there's one side of it which is commemorating a past event. Right? So Pesach, Yitzis Mitzrayim, Shavuos, Matan Torah, V'chulu. But the truth is, every yontif also has a side of it which has yet to be revealed. Every yontif, so Pesach, there's two sides to Pesach. There's the fact that Yitzis Mitzrayim, which took place, and there's also an element of Pesach which has yet to come, the coming of Mashiach. Yitzis Mitzrayim, and Neflois, that the way Yitzis Mitzrayim is going, the miracles of Yitzis Mitzrayim is going to come back with Mashiach. In other words, Mashiach is going to fully unpackage what Pesach was. Same thing with Shavuos, for example. The Chazal say that the Torah that we have now is a tipa, is a hevel, is nothing compared to the Torah of Mashiach, which means that even Shavuos is incomplete until Mashiach comes. And Sukkot is the same thing. Sukkot is celebrating the fact that we were protected with an Aliyah Kavod. The Gemara in the beginning of Masechah Sukkot quotes Psukim, even to figure out Hilchas Sukkah. The Gemara quotes Psukim describing how when Mashiach comes, we'll be protected by a Sukkah as well. And so every Yontif has these two parts to it. But there's one Yontif of all Yom Tovim, which it's Kamat Kuloi coming from post Mashiach. And that's Purim. That's Purim. Purim is the pasuk in Megillah Esther itself points this out, and Chazal stress this, that the Yontif of Purim is Lo Yosef Mizarim. It won't end. It'll continue on. The Rambam famously writes, we'll see soon, the Rambam writes that when Mashiach comes, basically all we'll need is Chumash, basically Tanakh, and Megillah Esther. Megillah Esther, Purim will be forever. The fact the pasuk has to make that point is because the Iker light of Purim is really coming from post-Mashiach. It's really coming from post-Mashiach. And we're just trying to glean, to sort of hold on to it a little bit. And so everything that's Purim-dik is going to be telling us something. Oh, yeah, it's good. It's everything. It's good. Yeah. So everything with Mashiach, everything with Purim is telling us something about what's going to be when Mashiach comes. So with that in mind, so everything we learn about Purim is going to be something not just about Purim, it's also about what reality is going to be like with the Kavod Mashiach. And that's why it's so strange when Purim meets us, because our reality right now is very different than what reality is going to be with Mashiach. And so when those two realities, when those two perspectives, when those two time periods come together every year on Purim, strange things take place. And that's why it's strange, because it's not really from this time. So let's begin to investigate a little bit of that light of Gula as it's manifested and as it touches our world in Purim. So it's like this: of all the halachas of Purim, of all the minhagim of Purim, probably the strangest, or one of the strangest, is the minhag of costumes. That one of the ways, and it's not a halacha, it doesn't say this in Megillah Esther, certainly it's not a halacha in Shulchan, it's not a halacha from the Gemara, it's not halacha, but sometimes minhagim that Klal Yisrael sort of instinctually pick up on are sometimes the deepest. And so Klal Yisrael have this very ancient custom that we celebrate, we express the simcha that we have in Purim, dafka through our clothing. And ironically, dafka in clothing that on an average day would not cause simcha, it would cause discomfort. So on Purim, dafka, the celebration of Purim is manifest and it's expressed in clothing. So you have to figure out what that inyan is. In Marmukah number 1, So this is the minig is quoted by the Ramah in Shulchan Aruch and Tafresh Sadivav. So the Ramah, again, the context of the Ramah, he's talking about some halachic complexities that might come with costumes, but he just quotes the idea, Mashanogu lilbesh partzufim bepurim, the fact that we have different costumes and different outfits on Purim. So then he goes on to talk about some of the pratim. But this idea is recorded in Shulchan Aruch, and if it's recorded in Shulchan Aruch, not only is it okay to do and proper to keep, but that means it's something that has a lot of weight to it. So we have to investigate that inyan. Why is it that we celebrate Simchas Purim, Dafka Yitzhak clothing, Dafka from clothing? The truth is in the Megillah also, there's a lot of themes of clothing, changing clothing. Mordechai is sak ve'efer and regular clothing back and forth to celebrate his, the great gift that Haman comes up with, right? That eventually is given to Mordechai. He's going to wear the Levush Malchus. He's going to wear the royal clothing. The Megillah ends off with Mordechai Yatzef Ne'amelech, Levush Malchus with the royal clothing, Tchelos, Ragavan, and so on. And so clothing seems to be an Indian with Purim. So you have to investigate that. That's number one. Okay. So now let's begin to learn. So in Marmukah number 2, so this is a klal that we find. It's from all the Svarim, but Tzaddik in Tzidkas Tzaddik piece Reish Nun Vav explains it in the following way. Let's read through it together inside, and we'll see where it takes us. Kol Uma, K'moy sheyesh lo ra miyuchad, kach yesh lo gamkin esa nitzat kadosh miyuchad shemene chayusa. Okay, so Sezer Tzaddik introduces us to the following idea, that every single nation has a certain identity, a certain personality. There's a certain inyan that every nation is connected to deeply. And when we talk about the 70 nations, the Sheva Amin, so every single nation has its particular midah that is not only connected to deeply, but in a certain sense is the root of its very existence. That's its identity spiritually as well. And these midas that every single nation identifies itself as and part of is fundamentally Ra. It's fundamentally Ra. It's not politically correct to say, but he says, Kol Uma, it has a particular aspect, a certain midah that is being used and is being expressed by that nation in a corrupted version, in a corrupted way, in a way that's distancing them from the Rebbeinu Shalom, from the source of all sources. It says that Rav Tzaddik like this, but nevertheless, if something exists, it's because the Rebbeinu Shalom must be there, and the Rebbeinu Shalom must be investing his light and his energy into that thing, into that place, into that people. And so if you have any particular nation, if you want to break it down, you first have to identify what is the midah of that nation, Aleph. And when you identify what that midah is, that not only is a personality trait of that nation, that is the chiyas, that's the life force. That's the midah that is driving that nation, that gives it its identity, that gives it its life. And says Rav Tzaddik, ironically, of all, within all places, it's dafka in that midah that the ultimate, that the energy of the Rebbeinu Shalom fueling and sustaining that people is going to be found. That's where the Rebbeinu Shalom, that's where, so to speak, the Rebbeinu Shalom infuses his life force into that nation through that particular personality. So it's not just a random midah or a trait that comes because of stam, the circumstances of world history, that this nation has that particular midah. No, that's its essence. That's its essence. And because that's its essence, that's where its neshama is. That's where the Rebbeinu Shalom is going to be infusing his energy into that nation through that particular midah, which means that although that midah on the surface, or the way that nation is using it, is corrupted and negative, and that's why it's the essential quality of that nation. And once you're dealing with nations that are not the Jewish people, automatically we're dealing with something that's inherently corrupt and distant from Avodas Hashem. But since, says Rav Tzaddik, that is the place, that is the midah, that's the quality through which the Rebbeinu is investing his energy into that people. So despite the fact that it eventually materializes in a way that's corrupt, in a way that's against Kedusha, but in its very root, it must be essentially something positive. Because if that's the point of contact between that nation and the Rebbeinu Shalom, it must be in its very root, when you boil it down to its basic element, it must be something worthy, something worthwhile. If the Rebbeinu Shalom is only going to contact, so to speak, something, the point of contact between the Rebbeinu Shalom and anything is always going to be good and holy. Once it moves beyond that point of contact, then who knows? Then there's no guarantee in anything. But that point of contact must be essentially good. So if the point of contact between the Rabbanu Shalom and any nation is in that midah, so that means in its core, it must be something good. It then, again, takes on a life of its own. But its core must be something elementally and fundamentally good. That's the site. So every nation has a lot of inyanim. You identify its core midah, and the first meeting you have with that core midah is broken, is ugly, is unholy. But when you get down to its basic element, it must fundamentally be something productive and not only worthwhile, but something necessary in avodas Hashem. And so says Ritzadik like this. Again, just like every nation has a particular evil, a particular corruption that is its identity. But at the same time, it also must have a spark of divine energy that's sustaining it. Ketan, like we say, the Rebbeinu Shalom, you sustain all things. If it wasn't for the Rebbeinu Shalom's energy, then nothing would exist, including that nation. Now, the Chiyas Hashem Yisbarach Bavadu Davar Toiv. And that point, that spark of divine energy, obviously is a good thing if it's coming from the Rebbeinu Shalom. And if the essential nature and quality and essence and soul of that nation is a particular midah, and the ultimate soul of everything is being enlivened by God, so it must be that in its core, in its most elemental form, that quality of that nation, which is the soul of that nation, must be redeemable. And says Ritzadik, and that's the purpose of exile for the Jewish people going from nation to nation. What we do is we go from country to country, we pick up on the identity and the personality of that nation, and what we're doing slowly but surely is digging down to its most fundamental core. And you get down to that nitzitz, that spark, that point of contact between the Rebbeinu Shalom and that particular midah. We absorb, so to speak, that quality, that spark into our system as a Jewish people and use it for avodas Hashem. And now that's called redeeming that spark. It's called taking that midah, which until now has been identified in that nation as something corrupt and unholy, but we strip it down to its most basic element, incorporate it into avodas Hashem, and that's called redeeming that spark. It's called redeeming that spark. And when we do that, the nation all of a sudden does not like us anymore, and we move on to the next one. That's the history of Galus. Valzehu Galus, this is the purpose of exile, liklait aisei davar taiv, the Yisrael, to absorb that point of goodness, which the nation that we're in, the host nation that we're by, that midah that is not living in congruence with its basic core goodness. It's not living like that. So we have to come and get down to its core and use it properly. And when we absorb that core nucleus of the point of contact between the Rebbeinu Shalom and that midah, which must be a good element of that midah, then we've absorbed that quality, and that nation, in a certain sense, now lost its life force, and b'derech klal, it begins to fall apart. It gives a few kicks first, just like any animal or any fish taken out of water begins to flop around, so it makes a lot of noise, but that's a symptom of it being over. Now, says Ritzadik, now this is true historically all over the time, throughout Galus, but there's one particular episode in Tanakh, which is mamish, like obvious of this Indian, which is the story of Purim. The holding of Purim of Esther Malka being taken to the Malchus, into the palace of Achashverosh, is not a mashal, it's a reflection of this story collectively, of Klal Yisrael being not just in Galus, but making our way, whether we realize it or not, and whether we want to or not, making our way to the very, very core of that particular nation. So that nation has a lot of cities and a lot of infrastructures, but the Malchus, the palace, is going to represent the soul of that nation, and the inner chamber of that palace is going to represent the point of contact between the Rebbeinu Shalom and the inner dimension of that soul of that nation, which ultimately is going to be that midah that the nation embodies, but in its good, in its purest form. And that's what Esther Malka is doing on behalf of the Jewish people, entering in the world of Paras and Madai, the world of Persia, and absorbing within Knesset Yisrael the midah that is Paras and Madai. That's symbolized and reflected over her story of being in not just the palace, but mamish in the inner chamber. And so he says, this is the Indian of Esther being taken for Achashverosh. She's a big tzaddikus, a balas ruach hakodesh. So how could such a thing happen to her? The answer is that this is the story of the Jewish people, and she was representing the Jewish people at the time. So this is a story of Galus, and in particular, the story of Purim is highlighting this sugya of the Jewish people going into another nation and getting to the core of what that nation is about and absorbing it into our bloodstream in a holy way. Okay, so what is the midah of Paras and Madai? What's the midah of Persia that the story of Purim is revolving around? Because again, we'll understand, as we said before, Purim is a yontif that's the Iker Yemaisa Mashiach. And so if we could, and in order for Purim to happen, it's all revolving around the Jewish people absorbing that spark of Paras into our system, which means that spark of Paras, that spark of Persia, which is the story of Purim, must be fundamentally essential in understanding and being able to experience redemption, Mashiach. Again, that's what Purim is. Purim equals Mashiach, equals Geula, and Purim is about absorbing Paras into our bloodstream in a healthy way. So that means that this, whatever the midah of Paras is mamish the kli in order to experience Mashiach. So that's important to know. So what is Persia? So it's Gemara Brachas, Marmukah number 3. The Gemara says in Brachas Chesim Beis, Tanya, Rav Gamliel said, B'shleisha dvarim, it's a strange sentence, Rav Gamliel said, B'shleisha dvarim oyev ani es ha-Parsiyin. There are 3 things that I admire about the Persians, said Rav Gamliel. Hein snuim b'achilasan, utsnuim b'sakisei, utsnuim b'davaracher. They're modest in certain elements. They're modest in their eating, they're modest in the way they go to the bathroom, and they're modest with their relationships between men and women. There's a certain midah of tznius that they have. Now it's interesting, the next line of the Gemara, by the way, is that the Gemara then brings a brisa that you should know the Persians are mamish, they're on a conveyor belt again. They're just mamish, like, they're terrible, they're going straight to Gehenna. The Gemara says it's like an interesting juxtaposition, right? The first line is Rav Gamliel, he's mamish praising them. Rav Gamliel is a Nasi, he's coming from the world of Malchus based David, Mashiach and David, and he's praising the Persians. And yet the Gemara says they're mamish going to Gehenna. Well, the answer is this nakuda, is that, of course, the Persians, the way they're embodying their particular midah is in a corrupted way, is in an unhealthy way, and is in a way that's taking them away from the Rebbeinu Shalom and taking them to that other place. But Rav Gamliel, what he's doing is this process of birur, he's identifying the core element of what Persia is about in a way that we could absorb it within ourselves. And so what the Gemara is telling us is that the nakuda of Paras is in of tznius. Now this inyan of tznius is something that we find throughout the Megillah. Take a look at Marmukah number 4. It's the Gemara Megillah Daf Yud Gimel Amid Aleph. The pasuk says regarding the whole mice over there that Achashverosh is gathering all the women. So it says Be'erev Hiba U'Baikir Hishava. The girls would go at night and they would come back the next morning. Rabbi Yochanan said Migenuse Shaloisa Rasha Lamanu Shvachai. Ironically, says Rabbi Yochanan, from the story, this story, which is talking about how much of a lowlife Achashverosh was, and how despicable he was, Davka in there you see some element of shvach that's praiseworthy. There's an element of tznius, that he was only with people by nighttime, which is a little bit more tzniistic than during the day, obviously. And so this is says the Gemara is pointing out this Indian, that even Achashverosh, who's in other words, every nation has its identity, and of all the people of that nation, the one that's going to embody that identity the most, and specifically in a very paradoxical way, because again, the closer you get to the core, the more strange it becomes of what that midah is. Is it good, is it bad? So the closer you get to the soul of the nation is going to be through the king. The king is going to be the embodiment of that midah, both in its corrupted version and a little bit a hint to its positive version. And that's exactly what you see by Achashverosh, the midah tznius, which is a praiseworthy midah, but it's in the context of something that's completely ugly. And that's exactly what Persia, what it's about. Now, this is, so in other words, so based on these Gemaras, what is the real story? What is the conflict? What's going on with Purim? What's going on with Purim is that Esther and Mordechai, Esther through the shlichus of Mordechai, is being sent to the Malchus of Achashverosh to incorporate within ourselves this midah of tznius. That's what Purim is about absorbing the midah of tznius. Now, this is what's interesting, because when it comes to most Yom Tovim, whenever we have a bad guy, the bad guy you can identify. There's one bad guy. Right? Chanukah is Antiochus, the Yevanim, and so on, Mitzrayim, and so on. Purim, we have 2. We have Achashverosh, it's Paras. Then you have Amalek, of Haman. So what does Amalek fit into this? So take a look at Marmukah number 6. This is from Tzaddik again in Reish Nun Vav. Tzaddik says, Ki Amalek hepach hatznius. So you have sort of like the way to think of it is that Esther Malka, on behalf of the Jewish people, are going into the base Malchus of Achashverosh to capture Tznius, which is being held prisoner by Poras. But then you have, on the other hand, this enemy called Amalek that's trying to stop Esther Malka from doing this. And why is that? Because Amalek embodies, says Rav Tzaddik, the very opposite of Tznius. Amalek represents everything that's preaches, everything that's out in the open, not modest, not hidden, not mysterious, everything revealed, everything on the outside. And so you have this fight between Mordechai and Haman. Haman is trying to poison the Jewish people to stop this process of absorbing tznius into the bloodstream. Because again, if you have tznius, you have Purim, you have Mashiach. That's the end of Amalek. So what Amalek is desperately trying to do is fight this midah of tznius by injecting us with the midah of pretzis, with the opposite of tznius. And that's what's going. That's the subplot. That's what's going on in Purim. Says Amalek is the opposite of modesty. The Lakach Nemerbai, this is why it says regarding Amalek, when they were first attacked, V'lo Yarei Elokim, that Amalek is the midah of not Yiras Hashem, the opposite of Yiras Hashem. Ki mitzad hayiru atznius. And says Rav Tzaddik, what does it mean, Yiras Hashem? Yiras Hashem is always associated, says Rav Tzaddik, with modesty. A person that's God-fearing is automatically going to be a modest person. Kamash Omer ben Darim, again, Rav Tzaddik is, Kol Turku was on his fingertips. He doesn't just say something stam, it's based on the Marmakim. The Gemara says in the Dorim Chafam at Aleph, the Yira Hiabusha. It says in Pasuk that the Rebbeinu Shalom, Moshe Rabbeinu repeats to us, he's saying in Sefer Dvarim, that the Rebbeinu Shalom made Maimon Har Sinai with the whole, all the Maisim, all the miracles of Maimon Har Sinai, in order that there should be Yira on your face, that we should have fear of heaven. We should be Yari Shemayim. Says the Gemara in the Dvarim, what does it mean to be Yira Shemayim? It means by Shanim, that a person should have a midah of busha, a midah of modesty. And so says Rav Tzaddik, Yira is identified by the Gemara Nedarim as modesty. Amalek that are called Lo Yarei Elikim means that they are the embodiment of everything that's the opposite of modesty. And the Yira HaBusha, Vatznias Mitzad Busha. Yira equals busha, a certain sense of bashfulness, and bashfulness is connected with modesty. A person has a certain midah of modesty, it means that they're going to be bashful when they're forced to not be modest. Kamashikasav, as the pasuk says by Adam Rishon, Kaidem Achet, before the sin, before the sin, there was nothing to be bashful about. Everything was fine, so there was no sense of busha. But post the sin, there's a lot of things that we shouldn't be so proud of. And so, a healthy sense of bashfulness, a sense of modesty, is healthy. Who reish is going. And says Rav Tzaddik again, he just deepens this quality. Amalek again is the anti-Yiras Hashem. Yiras Hashem means modesty and bashfulness. Amalek is anti-Yiras Hashem. It's the opposite of tznius. That's why Amalek knows that if Adam and Chava, if that sin is corrected, right, then what's going to happen to Amalek? He's finished, right? He's finished. So everything Amalek is trying to do is to stop that tikkun from happening. He doesn't want Esther Malka. He doesn't want Esther Malka to take the tznius from the house of Achashverosh and Malchus. He doesn't want that to happen. That's his end. And so what Amalek therefore does, what Amalek therefore tries to convince the world is that everything is fine right now. There's nothing there's nothing to fix. Like everything's fine. It's just like before the chet, you could just go around naked and like there's no sense of tznius. Do that now. It's fine. In other words, once there's a sense once there's a sense that we are not the way we were before the chet, then automatically that's going to result in wanting to correct things, wanting to go back to the chet. Amalek doesn't want that. So Amalek has also, the identity of Amalek is a lack of tznius, and it also works to his benefit. Because if the world lives with lack of tznius, it means that the world is living as if it's still kaidem achet. And if we're living like it is before the sin, it means that we're not going to work on correcting any sin because we're just pretending as if it never happened. And so the fact that the essence of Amalek is a lack of tznius, it works to his benefit too. Because again, in order to stop a person from doing tshuva, the easiest thing you could do is make the person, fall into the mistake of thinking that there's nothing to correct, right? If you know that there's something to correct, it's still hard to do tshuva. But if you don't even know there's something to correct, then you're not going to start. So Amalek tries to convince the world there's nothing to correct. How does he try to convince the world there's nothing to correct? By making us live as if it's still before the sin. And how do we live before the sin? Without any busha. So if a mullah can get you to live without any busha and without any tznius, then there's nothing inside of you that's being triggered to tell you that there's something to correct. And so this is what a mullah's modus, this is their mahalach. Lack of tznius, and by injecting in the world a sense of lack of tznius, then not only that he thrives, and the world continues on as if it's before the sin when it's in fact not. Okay, that's a little bit on the side. And this is why we find, says Rav Tzaddik, that a mullah, we have this quality that he always looks just at the superficial, at the surface. I'll say the Esav regarding Esav, and a mullah is the concentrated essence of Esav, that paishet tuafa, that he's compared to a pig that puts its feet out as if it's kosher. The hidden sign of chewing its cud it doesn't have, but the external sign of a split of it does. So the whole inyan of a mullah, which is Esav, is lack of tznius, looking only on the surface and the outside. So this is the story of Purim. You have the inyan of Purim, which is to conquer tznius, and a mullah is trying to stop this by convincing us that you don't need tznius, it's unnecessary, just go the way it is on the outside, as if it's before the sin, everything's fine, don't worry about it. But that's the conflict. That's the inyan. Okay. More than that, we find that the Esther Malka, who's sent in particular to do this mission of absorbing tznius from Paras into the Jewish people system, her befrat, we find such a thing from the Gemara that her inyan, her personal lamida, was very extreme with tznius. Says the Gemara in Megillah, Marmukah number 7, also Gemara in Daf Yud Gimel. The Gemara says, B'schar tznius, shaisa b'rachel, that it goes back to Rachel Imenu already. Rachel Imenu had tznius in the fact that she didn't tell Yaakov Avinu about what was going on with Leah. Right? She kept it private. She had a certain sense of modesty and bashfulness about her. So because of that, she has a descendant, Shalom Melech. And Shalom Melech was also tznuah when he was appointed a king. So he doesn't tell the whole world about it. He goes back to his regular business. He's able to hold it in. He doesn't have to show it. Esther. And this Esther comes from a yichus, not just of malchus, a yichus of tznius. And that's how the Gemara identifies it.
But her whole name is Hester.
Right, her name is Hester. Her name is Hester, exactly. More than that. What's ironic is, and again, this is part of the theme of Purim, that is Hapichu, right? So the Gemara says in Megillah that there was a certain Aveira the Jewish people committed, which led to the Gezer of Haman, right? And so ironically, this Aveira, although it led to our problems, it also led to its own solution. So it says the Gemara like this, Marmukah number 8, the Gemara says in Megillah, again, Yud Beis Mid Aleph, there's a conversation, the Gemara of all people, the Gemara says that Talmidim asked Rishon Marichai, what did the Jewish people do at that time in order to be worthy of, to have such a punishment of destruction? So Rishon Marichai, interesting, Rishon Marichai says, Nu, Zagalein, you tell me, what do you think? So Talmidim said, they went to the party. That's Mistam, what it was, that's how the Megillah starts. They went to the party. So it says Rishon Marichai, in that case, it should only be the Shushan. Why all Klal Yisrael? So Talmidim said, okay, that's what we're asking you. So Rishon Marichai says, I'll tell you, it's because in years before that, Nebuchadnezzar, who destroyed the first Beis HaMikdash, made a whole statue. Questionable whether it's a Avodah Zarah or not, but he made a statue. And all of Klal Yisrael bowed down to the statue. And that's the Shtat Tzemaisa in Sefer Daniel. So because of that, that's why said Rishon Marichai, the Jewish people were worthy of being destroyed. So ask the Talmidim, so why weren't we? It's Taka Big Aveira. So it says Rishon Marichai like this: the Bnei Sheshtachvu L'Tzelem, Marmukah number 8, they bow down to the statue. Amr Loi, no v'chimas upanim yesh b'davar. So why do we get off the hook? Hashem's just letting things go. So Amr Lehem, no. Heim Loi asu el lepanim, af HaKadosh Baruch Hu lo yasim el lepanim. The Aveira itself was only on the outside. On the inside, the Jewish people were not happy about what they were doing. Their heart were to heaven, and their hearts weren't in this Aveira. So since the Aveira itself was only external, so the whole story of Haman and the decree of Haman and the threat of Haman was also only external, and being the whole thing unraveled itself. But let's understand the oimik of this. This is not just, so you read that Gemara, okay, so they didn't really mean it, so the punishment wasn't so bad. This was the beginning of the Jewish people absorbing tznius. Because what does tznius mean? Tznius means that what you see is not what's really there. What you saw by the Jewish people, they're bowing down to a statue. That wasn't the full truth. This was the beginning of their conquest of tznius. albeit early on, so it's not really worked through yet. So this was not a good display of tznius. You're not supposed to bow down even on the outside. But al kol panim, you're seeing the seeds being planted that would eventually materialize with Esther Malka taking tznius back from the world of Paras. And it begins with the Jewish people sinning, but only sinning on the outside, of having a quality of tznius on the inside. Not only is this true in the beginning of the Chet, but you see that at the end of the story, what was the turning point when Esther Malka the Gula begins to unfold, is when she goes into Achashverosh willingly, right? That's Lamaisa, right? Mordechai says you have to go in. She said, Kasher Vati Avadi, she went in willingly. So that's a big Averi. That's if there's anything that's a lack of tznius, right? To go in like that. Chazal even say that Achashverosh was shocked that she would go in willingly. So look how Ritzelik puts it. Marmukah number 8, again, Marmukah number 9, I'm sorry. It's also in Tzidkas, it's Tzadik Reish Nun Vav. V'hatzola, how did the redemption come? Aydei shenichnas baratzin, right? Through Esther Malka going into the king, baratzin. There's a priestess. That's not modest. Hepech tznius. Rak be'emes, but the truth is what was happening. V'hatzneya upnimi is hayitoy v'kedusha. Chazal say, the Zohar Kadosh says, that even when Esther Malka went in, baratzin, it wasn't really her. She sent the shade. She sent the shade. It's like the Zohar Kadosh. And the Kisveri, in the end of Eitz Chaim, he talks about this. Baruch is such a mosig of being able to send shadim in your place for certain things. So, I mean, okay, so whatever it means on their level, but Rabbi Nachman taught that it means that a person might find themselves in a place that's not so nice. Okay, send the shade. Send the shade. In other words, like, separate yourself from what's happening. A level of separation, a level of modesty, a level of a part of you that's concealed, that's hidden within the external. It's not all of you doing something wrong and then you have to do tshuva on it. You have to do tshuva on it even for the surface, but on the inside be doing something else. And so says Ratzah, that's what Esther Malka was doing. On the outside, she was with Achashverosh. On the inside, she's completely not there. And it was Davka, that type of activity, that was required in order to fully absorb and conquer that quality of tznius, of doing something which on the outside is the extreme of unholiness, and then dafka, that same moment on the inside, mamish being with Mordechai Tzaddik. And so that dynamic of extreme opposites at the same time, and not seeing the inside from the outside at all, that's the extreme, that's modesty to its extreme. And that's ultimately what Esther Malka was being sent to do, is to conquer that and to absorb that quality of tznius. And that dafka happened at that moment. Says Ritzelik again. Rak be'emes, ba'atzneya, in a modest place, in the place of the neshama, pnimius, ha'itoy v'kedusha. The whole leading that Esther Malka was doing was all in the kedusha. There's a sefer that we have from the Ramchal that it's called Kinas Hashem Tzvakas. Kinas Hashem Tzvakas. It's a whole sefer written against Shabsai Tzvi and that movement. And so part of the sefer, a large part of the sefer, talks about the sugya of Aver L'Shma, of doing Averis but L'Shem Shemayim, which is obviously something that was appealing to Shabsai Tzvi and the whole. So part of the sugya that he talks about is the whole story with Esther Malka. And just again, without explaining, but if you take a look over there, he talks about the depth of what with the tikkunim and the unbelievable kedusha that Esther Malka was working on and fixing and building within herself and behalf of the Jewish people. Dafka at that moment when she's with Achashverosh Baratzin, that moment of Kasher Vati Avati, which on the outside is the Oimek Hara, at the same time there's an Oimek Atay that's being developed. Mamash V'Nahapichu. Again, it has a whole arichas how this was happening and the Gedarm for this. But at that moment, that's what Mordechai Tzaddik told Esther Malka. This is what the Rebbeinu Shalom needs of us right now to conquer this. The Oimek Tznius has to be in this way. Gugam Kein Tznius. Vaideza says her Tzaddik, and Dafka through this. Kol Shorish and Tzitzik Kedusha by Niklat Ba. That's how she was able to absorb every last vestige of this Midah Tznius by doing something that was the extreme in Tznius. That the outside is mamish one way and the inside is the exact opposite. So this is the story of Purim. It's all about Tznius. Amalek is trying to fight this with Pritzis, and that's the story of Purim. Okay. Here's the problem, though. The problem is like this. There's a Gemara Megillah, Yud Aleph and Mid Aleph. It's a whole block. It's a fascinating Gemara. The Gemara talks about many Amoraim, before they gave their drasha to to the Olam about Purim, they would take a pasuk in Tanakh, and that's Purim, that pasuk, and then they would darshan from there. So each Amar, pasuk la pischa la parsha mihacha, this is the pasuk that this Amar would use. So the Gemara says like this: Rabbi Yochanan, who is the same Rabbi Yochanan, by the way, that we saw before, who talked about the tznius of Achashverosh, right? So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yochanan pasuk la pischa la parsha mihacha. That Rabbi Yochanan began to darshan Purim from the following pasuk: Zachar chazdei v'emunasa l'beis Yisrael. It says in pasuk, the Rebbeinu Shalom remembered his kindness and his faith to the Jewish people. Ro kol afsi aretz es Yeshua Elokeinu. And when the Rebbeinu Shalom remembered his kindness and his faithfulness to us, the entire world saw his Yeshua. Eimesai ro kol afsi aretz es Yeshua Elokeinu. Said Rabbi Yochanan, what was the moment in history where all of the world saw the unbelievable Yeshua the Rebbeinu Shalom? The name Mordechai Vesta. So that means Rabbi Yochanan is identifying the pasuk that is Purim is a pasuk talking about everything being on the outside, everything being exposed, the whole world seeing it. So here's the pella. I don't get it. The whole inyan of Purim is what? Is tznius. The whole inyan of Purim is to conquer tznius and to absorb tznius in our bloodstream. Mm-hmm. And the one pasuk that Rabbi Yochanan identifies is Purim is what? Is to be on the outside. Ro kol afsei aretz. See, afsei aretz doesn't just mean, just means the corners. It means the farthest, most extreme, most external, most chitzonis. That's the inyan of Purim. It's the opposite of Purim. If you think about this, is mamash a theme of Purim, right? What's the whole inyan of Purim? A lot of Persumei Nisa is one of the identifying qualities of Mikra Megillah. One of the halachos. There are Persumei Nisa to be the first in the nation, to be on the outside. The whole Megillah is lashon of Gilui. Megillah is Esther, though, right? Right. So, and what's the halacha of Purim? When you read the Megillah, the whole Megillah has to be unrolled the whole time, unrolled. So the whole inyan of Purim is to be out in the open. Be out in the open. When a person drinks on Purim, the whole inyan of drinking is what? Mishnechnas yayin. It's yotzasai. It's the opposite of tznius. The opposite of tznius. So what's going on over here? I thought the whole inyan of Purim is tznius. Then all of a sudden, Yochanan comes to this pasuk, and now all of a sudden, when you think about it, there's such strong themes of Purim of lack of tznius. Lack of tznius. So what's going on over here? What's going on over here? More than that, there's another kasha. Until now, we've been saying that, again, Purim is a yontif that's Yemaisa Mashiach, right? Which means that the core element of Purim is going to be the core element required in order to have the kalim to experience Yemaisa Mashiach. Yeah? Which means, and we have identified what is the core element of Purim, Midat Tznius, which means that Tznius is the core element required in order to receive the Meichin of Yemaisa Mashiach. Here's the problem. The whole inyan of Yemaisa Mashiach is what? Is to go back to a time where there's nothing to be embarrassed of. It means, what's the point of modesty? What's the inyan of tznius? It means that there's something that should be covered, something that's not so good. So you have to be private about it. If everything is other Rishon Kaidem Achet, it says in Pasuk they had nothing to be embarrassed about. Then what did they? There was no busha. There was no tznius. There's nothing everything's fine. The whole inyan of tznius, l'chayra, is something that fundamentally is only shaykh before Mashiach comes. Once Mashiach comes and things are corrected, then what's to be embarrassed about? A person doesn't have to be embarrassed of good things. What do you have to be embarrassed of it? If there's a sense of tznius, it means that there's something deep down in the psyche of the person that they're a little bit ashamed of, and boiling it down, there's probably some level of truth to be ashamed of something. And so, but when Mashiach comes, if everything is perfect, then what's the shame? Where's the shame coming from? Where's the tznius coming from? So again, here are the basic questions. Again, if the essential quality of Purim is tznius, then we have two problems. First of all, Rabbi Yochanan identifies the pasuk of Purim is Ro Kol Afsei Aretz Yeshua Elokeinu. Purim, you drink until everything is revealed. There's an openness, Persumei Nisa as part of the halachos of Purim. So that doesn't make sense. How that works? That's Aleph. And Beis, what's the place of tznius by Yemaisa Mashiach? By Yemaisa Mashiach, we'll go back to Adam Rishon Kaidem Achet. On the Rishon Kaidem Achet, there was no tznius. It wasn't necessary to be tzanua. Lo yis b'shashu. The pasuk says that as a milo, lo yis b'shashu. So what's going on? The midah that is required in order to propel us into Yemaisa Mashiach is a midah of modesty, which is not going to be needed when Mashiach comes. How do we understand this?
About snares lefes, it's not because we're hiding something, it's because it makes us more relatable to
Okay, so we'll have to see. But even to be more relatable, it means that the Rabbanu Shloim is hidden. But when we're dealing with Yemais Mashiach, everything L'chara is going to be revealed. What's the even if you want to go deeper and say, well, all the way to Hashem is about mimicking, it's about being, paralleling the Rabbanu Shloim. So now the Rabbanu Shloim is hidden. So I understand how now Avodah Hashem would require a level of modesty, because if you're trying to connect to God through your Avodah, and God is hidden, so you have to be hidden. But when Mashiach comes, God's out in the open. So then Avodah Hashem should relate to that, which is everything out in the open. That's how it was before the Chait. Adam and Chava were out in the open with not only was there nothing to be ashamed of, but their Avodah was V'loyis by Shashim. Because their Rebbeinu Shalom was out in the open, so they were out in the open. So Mashiach comes, the is going to go back to that, no? So if it goes back to that, then there should be no place for modesty, not in terms of anything to be embarrassed of, Aleph, and base, the Avodah should be to mimic what God is. That's Yiddishkeit, by the way. We mimic what the Rebbeinu Shalom is doing, right? So the Rebbeinu Shalom on some cosmic level, on some divine level, is meniach tefillin every morning. So we put on tefillin. It's mimicking the Rebbeinu Shalom. So when Mashiach comes, or Kaidem Achet before the Menchav, the Rebbeinu Shalom was out in the open, then we should be out in the open. So what's the sin of tznius being dafka required in order to experience Yemais Mashiach? It's quite the opposite. So the answer just can't be, okay, v'napich. That's hard for him. That's not the... That is the answer. Right? You have to, we have a few more minutes, so you have to explain a little bit more. Okay, take a look at Maramukah number 13. So, when you have a contradiction, and you're dealing with Purim, which is going to end up not really answering the contradiction, it's the only place to go is Israel, so that's where you have to go. So, in Maramukah number 13, is a Torah from the Mei Shiloach. The Mei Shiloach, it's bigger on the Parsha, on Chumash, but at the end of each chelik, there's Torahs that the Ishbitzer said on different Gemaras and Chazals and so on. So this is a Torah that the Ishbitzer said on the Gemara Megillah, Daf Yud Aleph and Yud Aleph. The particular Gemara that it's about is not necessary for right now, but it's Chalal. He's talking about the whole union of Purim. So he says like this: all the miracles that the Rebbeinu Shalom did for Klal Yisrael, Yitzias Mitzrayim, Kriyas Yamsuf, all the Nisim will be called Nisim Guyim, open, revealed miracles. Zenek Pella, those are obviously wondrous miracles that are in place. They're in the place of Bayr. See, it's ironic. Although we call them revealed miracles, Nisim Guyim, the emes, says the Ishbitzer, you can't really call them visual miracles. They're not called Nisim Guyim emes. Why? Ki achar hanes nishol k'mashayit. Because it's not true. Kriyas Yamsuf, at that moment, it was a visual. You can see it. But what happens after Kriyas Yamsuf is over? The water goes back. Now it's just a memory. Now it's just a Messiah that we hear from ancestors. It's no longer visual, right? Rak Loshen Shmuel. So the moment of the miracle is fleeting. So once the moment is over, when you talk about on a larger scale, like historically, what was this miracle? This miracle is no longer for a momentary time, it was visual. The vast majority of that miracle's influence on us is hearing. It's based on a Messiah. Kiloi Nishamim Rak Shmiya says 9. All that's left is what we hear from our ears, the Messiah. And so he says, Afanei Shanasim Mimordechai Esther. But here's the chiddush of Purim. It's dafka because Purim did not change anything with supernatural, special effects. That's dafka why it could be considered a miracle that is still seen. The pasuk that Rabbi Yochanan quoted in the Gemara is what? Zachar chazdei v'manasa l'beis Yisrael v'ro kol avsei aretz es Yeshua Elokeinu. And said Rabbi Yochanan, when is the moment that a person is able? What's the miracle that you can say for all time? Ro kol avsei aretz Yeshua Elokeinu. That's the Mordechai Esther. That's the story. That's the miracle of Purim. It said the issue is like this. Afanei shnasim Mordechai Esther. Here Kadosh Baruch Hu was. What the Rebbeinu Shalom do on Purim? Basic. This is the basic inyan of Purim is what? Asher av kol darkei hateva sheisnagu ba'olam gam heim einam rak b'tovas Yisrael. The Rebbeinu Shalom was not infiltrating nature and moving it aside for some divine revelation, and at the moment it's amazing, and then everything goes back to before. The Rebbeinu Shalom was redefining for ourselves, was explaining to us, what is it that you're seeing all the time? What are you always seeing? We're always seeing nature. No, the Ribbono Shel Olam makes the world in such a way that there's nature, and usually we think of it is that this world. I guess the way the Mekubalim, sort of define it or term it would be that Teva would be the Kalim. Like this world, the physicality of this world, Gashmias, the world that we occupy, is a kli, is a vessel for the Ribbono Shel Olam's presence. And the Ribbono Shel Olam's presence is like that light that fills the vessel. So what's an average miracle, like Kriyas Yamsuf, Yitzis Mitzrayim, is that the Ribbono Shel Olam is overwhelming the Kalim with a lot of R. Ad Kedei Kach, and that moment when the light is so intense, the Keli is like, you might don't even notice it, right? It's overwhelming at that moment. But what happens when the iris retreat, or the dimmer goes back, to a regular setting, then what remains is the Keli. The Keli wasn't really affected. The Keli was overwhelmed by the presence of light for the time being. But the light goes back, the Keli is back to square one. The Chiddush of Purim is the Ribbono Shel Olam revealing to us that the Keli is made of light. The Keli is made of light. Instead of the Keli being something that is then manipulated, overwhelmed, or by the Ribbono Shel Olam's divine presence, nature itself is made of divine light. That's all it is. That's the Chiddush of Purim. The reason, let's understand deeply. Why is it that nature is so consistent? See, here's the Chiddush, and the Ishbitzer doesn't make this point, but in the writings of Chabad Hasidus, the Rebbe Rashab in particular, this is mamish, one of the big yesodis of Chabad Hasidus, which is the following Nakuda. Why is it that nature is so consistent? Why is it, so to speak, why is it that Nisim Gluyim, miracles, are once in a while, and nature is a thing that's consistent? The answer is because the deepest side of God is the unchanging, absolutely consistent, infinite light that was before creation and that remains after creation. We say in davening every day, every morning, Atu Ad Olam, Atu Mishneh Olam. God, you are here before creation and you're after creation. That's not just saying stop. The deepest description that we have of the Ribbono Shel Olam, the first moment, then the Rizal, it's the highest, go back, rewind to the deepest expression of God's existence, is that moment before creation, where the Ribbono Shel Olam wasn't forcing himself into any limited space, so to speak. He was Kiviyachol being himself. And what is that self? Ein Sof, infinite light, unchanging. What does infinite mean? Infinite means it's exactly the same on this side of the table to that side of the table. It's infinite. It's infinite. It's homogeneous. It's absolutely one. Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. The deepest thing we could say about God when he's being Kiviyachol himself in his own place is that he's absolutely one, unchanging. If everything still is Kiviyachol made of light, everything is made of light, then there's two madregas to the Ribbono Shel Olam's presence in existence. There's who Kiviyachol, there's the deepest side of who God is, mitzidai, in his place of comfort, which is unchanging, which is infinite, and infinite has a quality of unchangingness, of consistent. It can't change. There's no point to say this is different than that. It's infinite. And then you have the Ribbono Shel Olam as he's willing to show differences, kiviyachol, fitting himself into our world. Fine, those are the two things. So now we have this phenomenon, which are miracles, right, which come and go with special effects, and then you have nature itself, which is unchanging. But the Chiddush of Purim is what is to reveal that nature itself is divine. Nature itself is of divine origin. So now think back, now take a step back and think to yourself, okay, now which moments in history are reflective of a deeper element of divinity? Is it the moments where things are mamish shaking up the world? Or is it the moments where everything's mamish the same? If everything is ultimately an expression of divinity, then the deepest divinity is one that's unchanging. The deepest divinity is a divinity that's infinite, that you can't make a difference between this part and that part. So the nature itself, when we think of nature as something outside of divinity, then it becomes the most boring, it becomes Hester Panim. But when you reorient yourself from Purim to realize that nature itself is divine, then the greatest gilui, the greatest revelation of the Rebbeinu Shalom in the deepest of senses is in nature, is nature itself. And so what happens on Purim is that the quality that hides the Rebbeinu Shalom is the greatest revelation of the Rebbeinu Shalom. In order to notice something, there has to be a contrast to something else, right? You notice this chair because there's space around this chair that's not this chair. So that's why you notice the chair. But if something is everything, then you don't notice it because there's no contrast to it. When you notice miracles, because that a miracle is a level of divine revelation that's not infinite in its nature. And because of that, you could conceptually contrast that ray of divine light to outside of that ray of divine light. But the reason why God is hidden in nature is not because he's hidden, is because that it's a reflection of the infinity of the Rebbeinu Shalom, where there's nothing else but him to contrast it with. It's the Hester of Teva is itself the deepest Gilui. This is the ultimate quality of Purim. When we're talking about absorbing tznias, it's not a matter of tznias. When we think of tznias now, the requirement of tznias now is mamish to be hidden because there's things to be ashamed of, or like this, and we have to become more internal people. A person's everything on the outside, that he becomes a superficial person. So there's a lot of reasons to be tzanua. So yes, but when Mashiach comes, so what's this in of tznius? When Mashiach comes, the answer is the level of divinity that we're going to experience with Yom Mashiach is a divinity that is fundamentally hidden. It has to be hidden. There's nothing to contrast it with. It's going to be a revelation that everything is Rebbeinu Shalom, which automatically means it won't be seen. Because how could you if everything is Rebbeinu Shalom? There's nothing to compare it to. It's an infinite truth. The Rebbeinu Shalom will be shown to be hiding in plain sight. That's the name of the, right? I thought of the title and then I had to come up with this year. That's a good title. Hiding in plain sight. That's the Indian over here. That's the Indian of Purim.
So we won't know when the Gilui is here?
So this is the Chiddush. This is the Chiddush of Yom Mashiach. This is the Chiddush of Yom Mashiach. Is that we would, and this is maybe a sugya we'll investigate next Wednesday. That'll be for more next Wednesday. But we will see this nakuda is that we will carry with us enough of the nisim gluy. What's going to be with Mashiach is an inverse of what we think now. We think now that nature, that's not revelation, and open miracles, that's revelation. What's going to be shown with Yom Mashiach is the opposite, is that nature is divine revelation, and open miracles will be the contrasting points. We'll be able to appreciate the depth of revelation of nature by comparing it to the lower level of divine revelation, which will be the open miracles. We have a machlokes in Chazal between Rav and Shmuel. Mashiach, what's the difference between this world and Yom Mashiach? Rav said, Shmuel said, not much of a difference. This world, everything is nature. Next world will also be nature. Guy won't be in charge. That's only the difference. Not much change. Rav says, when Mashiach comes, no eye could possibly have fathomed the type of experience of Mashiach. Only God's eye can see such a thing. The Rambam passes like both. It's a big shah in the Rambam passes like both. There's nafkamin, it's not halacha between the two of them. Rambam passes like both. The answer is, when Mashiach comes, there's going to be open miracles. But instead of us thinking of open miracles from a Gaul's perspective, which is that's the moment of light, everything will be, the real light is going to be from the Kalim. It's Teva, it's nature that's going to be the true revelation of God. But you're not going to notice it because it's everything. What you're going to have are open miracles to use as a point of contrast. The miracles will be the Hester Panim. That's going to be the concealment from which we can then glean an appreciation and a revelation of Teva. Everything is going to be flipped on its head. That's why Purim is v'nahapich. Everything is flipped on its head. Tznius is going to be vital to appreciate Yom Mashiach because the deepest gilui of divinity with Mashiach, with the coming of Mashiach, is by its very definition a revelation that is not noticeable. It's a revelation which is not noticeable. It's a revelation of tznius. It's hiding in plain sight. That's the sight of Yom Mashiach. V'ro kol avsei aretz es Yeshua Elokeinu. And therefore, what we're seeing now is exactly what we're going to see then. But we don't, right now, we don't have a Kriyas Yamsuf to contrast this level of revelation with. And if we had a Kriyas Yamsuf right now, our eyes would be just focused on Kriyas Yamsuf. We don't have we don't have the perspective or the kalim developed within us yet to be able to sense the R that the kalim are made up of. But with Mashiach, what we're going to have is the ability to be sensitive to the light that the kalim are made from, and the ability to experience that light and to appreciate it and to notice it by comparing it to moments of revelation. So Rav and Shmuel are both true. The ultimate gilui is ayin lo'irasel kim z'u'secha. The eyes can't imagine such a thing. The gilui, the revelation is so intense, it's an infinite revelation. And that's exactly what Shmuel said. There's no difference between now and then, because that's exactly what nature is. The consistency of nature is a reflection of the consistency of infinity. That's what Teva is. Take a look. So he says like this. The last few lines, we'll just end with this. The last few lines in Marmukah number 13. So he says by Mordechai and Esther. So he says, the 2 lines from before the end. The holy Purim is what? Is something that's natural, right? Shalakach Esther, she was taken, the whole story. The Gamin in Mordechai, everything is nature. Ironically, that's exactly what you can, that's a type of miracle that you could always say you're seeing. Because it's not an event of a gilui that comes and goes. It's a reorientation of what Kalim are. And Kalim we're always seeing. Ki zois nikola ayin b'koles v'rega. That's something we're experiencing. It's the same world. That's paras. That's paras. That's the tzniya. When the Jewish people acquire the midah of tzniyas, the geuladik version of tzniyas is to recognize that what you thought until now, what remains until now is hidden, is in fact the deepest gilui. This is why, how is Purim celebrated? We start from the beginning, by clothing, by celebrating clothing. The simcha of Purim is expressed in the clothing. Because what are clothing? It's the kalim. It's the kalim of who you are. And the holiness of Purim is what? Is a celebration of this realization that the deepest R is the R that's actually manifest in the kalim. It's not the R that's filling the kli. It's the kli itself that's made of light. And the type of light that it's made of is of infinite nature. It's everythingness. And so everything about Purim is this nakuda, is that it's out in the open, it's absolutely unchanging, but yet completely new at the same time. That's exactly what it is. I just, to end off Marmukah number 14, so he says, V'yeshuv b'derech hateva, haynu tznius v'albosha. What is this is Rav Tzaddik again in Marmukah, in Reish Nun Vav, in Tzidkas Tzaddik. So he says, when you have a Yeshua, salvation like Purim, which is b'derech hateva, haynu tznius, that's modest, right? You don't see it. V'albosha, it's being clothed. And it's not an open miracle like we usually think of. But the truth is, it's dafka the hidden miracle. That's the deepest, most open miracle. It's the most open miracle. Because gam ba'avse oretz, even the corners of the earth, the hakara, meaning what does it mean the corner of the earth? Not like the world is around. But it means in terms of the ability to process spirituality. There are people that are avse oretz. It takes a certain sensitivity of the soul to even appreciate Kriyas Yamsuf. Because when you're dealing with light that's within the Kli, you have to be a light dika person in order to appreciate it. But if you're a Megushan dik, if you're very, very low and very earthly, and all that you identify with are Kalim, then experiencing light is not going to do much to you. But if you could have a miracle like Purim, which redefines what Kalim are, everyone can have a shaykhs to that. You don't have to be such a spiritual person to appreciate Kalim. So he says that's what Purim is. The nature itself is not just from Hashem, it's the deepest expression of the Rebbeinu Shalom's presence in your life. And that's why, again, it's another inyan. That's why Purim is also related to Torah Sheba'al Peh. It's moving away from Tanakh and ushering us into Torah Sheba'al Peh. Torah Sheba'al Peh, the Rebbeinu Shalom is not communicating openly anymore. It's now using human intellect. It's using the Keli, it's using the world of nature to figure out what God wants. That's the deepest revelation of God's will. Not a secondary one, it's the deepest revelation. It's not noticeable as divine because of the fact that it's revealing the infinite light of God. And infinity is not noticeable by its nature. But so when you have a pasuk in Tanakh, the contrast Torah Sheba'al Peh with, then you can appreciate Torah Sheba'al Peh. This is the side of Purim. That's why, again, just to end off very, very quickly, that's why one of the inyan that we find by the Megillah is that you had a king, Achashverosh, and in the good old days, like kings, we usually think that they did whatever they want. But ironically, with Purim, you see such a thing is that Persia had rules. Even the monarch couldn't do whatever he wanted. Achashverosh wants to kill Vashti, kill Vashti. No. The rules say you can't kill the queen, unless it's a time of national security. And that's what Haman was trying to convince him. If you don't kill Vashti, then every wife is going to rebel against her husband. And then the whole society is going to fall apart. National security, you could kill your wife. And it was working within the rules of Teva, within the rules of the Gedarim that were set, that even the king can't undermine, figuring out how to manipulate it. The whole inyan of Purim are about unbreakable rules. Unbreakable, consistent rules that cannot be broken, yet finding loopholes within those rules. Because that's the experience of Purim is a gili of Yemais Mashiach. What's Yemais Mashiach? Teva, unbreakable rules that will remain unbroken, but being able to understand them for what they are, to experience them as a divine revelation by contrasting them with the open miracles that we're going to have with Yemais Mashiach. Again, so Bez Hashem next week this is now like it's up here. What we're gonna do Bez Hashem next week is take this a little bit more L'maisa, bring it down Derech Avoda, and be able to maybe get some avodas that we can do for Purim itself. The avodas of Purim usually like Erev Purim, 2 days before Purim. Purim itself is hard to have any meichen for avodah. It's hard. By the way, it's a good klal. Don't lower the bar for yourself. Purim, there's babulim, there's all sorts of stuff. The ikar avodas before. So next week we'll bring in the Shukayach.